Panelists and dear participants, very good evening. Welcome to the Challenges to India's National Security and Emerging Foreign Policy Orientation webinar. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envisions a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. To speak on this issue, we have very senior professor from India. I got to meet Professor Arvind Kumar for the first time at Pondicherry University at some conference and several times in Delhi at JNU. Professor Arvind Kumar is head of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Professor Kumar is also the director of China Study Center, Northeast Study Center, and Center for Polish and European Studies. Today's program will be moderated by Dr. Monish Taurangban. He's a visiting fellow at NIAC. He's a senior assistant professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. And he is also coordinator of Northeast Studies Center at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He holds MPhil and PhD from JNU. Dr. Monish, the floor is yours. We can't hear you, Manish. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Pramod. And welcome to one and all to this very important webinar on a very pertinent theme. The geopolitical relevance of India is being debated increasingly across the globe and also in India's neighborhood. Many initiatives that India has taken over the years in its foreign policy orientations has been greatly recognized, has been debated and discussed all around the world. And as Pramod himself pointed out, we have a very senior professor, a very experienced professor, and a very regular commentator on Indian foreign policy and national security challenges in different forms of media and journal and academic forums, Professor Arvind Kumar. Besides this introduction, I would also like to tell you all that many a times, we have heard all these debates in India that the debates on Indian foreign policy and national security challenges has to be taken in other parts of India, not only in Delhi. It needs not be debated only in Delhi. And perhaps I think more than anyone else, Professor Arvind Kumar has been instrumental in the process and in the initiative that he has taken in terms of starting strategic studies and foreign policy studies in places apart from Delhi. His stint and very successful stint with the National Institute of Advanced Studies, having been foremost in starting the strategic studies program there, and being the brainchild, being the brains behind and the hard work that he has put in terms of starting this Department of Geopolitics and IR way back in 2010 has really blossomed, and it has to be seen in the number of students who have passed out from this department and now are experts and strategic analysts and academics in their own respective fields in think tanks across India and even abroad, and in the academic institutions in the length and breadth of India. I think that is perhaps the most important contribution of Professor Arvind Kumar to the field of geopolitics and IR in India. I will not stand between you and the speaker, and without further ado, I now welcome Professor Arvind Kumar to speak on this very important theme. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monish. And thank you, Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, for asking me to speak to such a well-informed group. And let me tell you that your nice is really nice. And I have been following it. It seems that your nice has really been raising a lot of important discourses on pertinent, important things, impacting global security, impacting global peace and stability. I have been asked to speak on India's national security challenges, and obviously I will link it with India's foreign policy choices. Because what I feel strongly is that managing national security and evolving foreign policy choices are intertwined. The notion of national security is highly encompassing. And you can see from the recent pandemic that how that has impacted. It has all the features of actual war. I think through this pandemic, the objectives of war are being realized. It is impacting on the economy. It has taken human lives, and obviously it has disturbed the larger peace and stability across the globe. So in fact, in that sense, I think the concept of national security no more is restricted to the management of borders. But nevertheless, border security remains paramount. There is no denying the fact. The evolution of foreign policy choices always centers around maximization of national interest in both the external as well as in internal environment. It is unlike domestic policy, because in domestic policy, a country will have the command and the control. But in making the foreign policy choices, I think the attempt has to be made in terms of how best a country understands the outside powers, or the country understands its neighbors or its adversaries, which is not in one's own control, which is largely outside of one's own control. So you can imagine the choices which one country has to make, like India, again will be very complex and complicated. The tools which are used in the foreign policy choices, it again is mainly to see that how a country can regulate, and not merely to change the behavioral patterns of a state. And that regulation becomes crux, especially in terms of knowing, because regulation does not mean adjusting the behavior of states, but to suit one's own interest in the best possible manner. And that perhaps India is ideally suited in terms of understanding the challenges which keeps emanating, especially at the national security front. India's national security challenges are varied. After this pandemic, as I said, that it is fairly clear what national security is not. It means the definition has been expanding, and everything which one really feels, especially in the context of putting more and more challenges to the national fabric, the societal fabric, that again becomes crucial point. National security is the requirement to maintain the survival of the state through the use of economic power, through the use of diplomacy, and also through the use of political instruments. Economic security remains paramount, because that is perhaps is one area where every country emphasizes mostly, especially in having the economic dominance to mobilize the regional public opinion, or largely the world public opinion in one's own favor. And you can see that those countries which have been able to use the resources in mobilizing international public opinion have been really in a better position in evolving their foreign policy choices. The threat perception matrix perhaps is very important thing in understanding the larger contours of India's national security challenges. And that perhaps gives a broad-based framework for analyzing the varying degree of threats emanating from India's neighborhood. So again, if you see and put that matrix, like what is India's most immediate threat? What is India's short-term threat? What is India's medium-term threat and long-term threat? I think in that matrix, I think one can really come to the conclusion that the most important immediate threat comes mostly from a country in India's neighborhood, that is Pakistan. India shares borders with 7 countries and confronts challenges of every kind from all the bordering states. Pakistan has been working with a single-minded aim to destabilize India. China does not really want to see India's rising. China basically has a different objective altogether. China wants to be unipolar in Asia in a multipolar world. So China also has the ambition to see that how it really impedes the progress made by India. And the problem, again, I will bring the case study of the recent standoff later, but I would like to say China's objective is very clear, that it has to really be a stumbling block for India's rise. And China-Pakistan nexus, again, is a very important factor in understanding the threats which India confronts from its neighborhood. Bangladesh, again, is a country which, again, borders with India. We have the largest border with Bangladesh. And the most important thing which we have to understand is that Bangladesh, obviously, we have been able to manage it in a manner which really gives certain confidence to India, especially in terms of having a neighbor, obviously not creating that much of disturbances. But yes, if you take the other factor like refugee or migrants issue, I think that really remains a factor for India-Bangladesh relation, and that factor again impacts on India's national security challenges. Nepal, I think the recent thing which has happened in Nepal, again, I would like to discuss that later, link it with that. But Nepal certainly is a country which has been all the time friendly with India. But somehow there has been certain misperception on part of India-Nepal relation, which really has led India-Nepal in the current crisis scenario. And again, Nepal border with India remains highly porous, and obviously it poses a challenge of different kind, different proportion. But Nepal, again, as I said, is a very important strategic country for India for many reasons, because if you see the map of Nepal, Nepal borders with India. I think 3 sides of Nepal is bordering with India. Only the northern side is bordering with China. So you can imagine the importance of Nepal, and that perhaps the misperception, or let me use the word mistrust, in the recent times in particular, has led to this new situation, which again I would like to bring it later. Myanmar, again, if you see Myanmar location, it borders with 4 of our important states of India, and that 4 states, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram, that perhaps is something which is very, very important for India in terms of getting it connected with the Southeast Asian nations and promoting India's Act East policy. But the threats which again are being confronted from this border are of different kind. Insurgency has been a phenomenon which is being confronted, which is being witnessed by India in terms of managing its national security challenges. Afghanistan, again, is a country which has a very limited border. If we take into account India's position on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, that border is very limited. But at the same time, again, the challenges which emanates from Pakistan are of different kinds because of the lack of peace and stability. And the challenges from Taliban in particular, these are obviously building a lot of roadblocks for promoting India's interest, despite the fact that India has come in a big way in terms of helping Afghanistan in many ways, especially in building the infrastructure. India, the stakes are really high in Afghanistan. If you see the other country, one again is a Himalayan country, Bhutan, that borders with India. But to an extent, I think India-Bhutan relationship has been seen as a part of, I don't know, the very good bilateral and positive relationship. But at the same time, there are a lot of apprehensions in Bhutan, especially in the context of their friendship treaty with India. And that perhaps has been revised. That has been revised in 2015, and to an extent, that was revised in 2007, and how that has really become a factor in promoting India-Bhutan interest. Bhutan obviously is again a very important Himalayan country, and India has been managing very well with Bhutan as far as the bilateral relationship with the country is concerned. There seems to be a lot of misperceptions created by India's neighbors, especially on India's intentions. And understanding intentions of any countries, understanding the fundamental goals of any country or the behavioral pattern of any country remains a part of the challenge. For all the strategy discourse, I think that remains a part of the challenge. And in the context of understanding the perception of India's neighbors with regard to India's intention, that perhaps again remains a greater challenge. I think there is no denying the fact that India occupies a pivotal position in South Asia. It has 80% of landmass belongs to India. 80% of GDP of South Asia is contributed by India. But to an extent, India does not reflects its ambitions to be seen as a hegemon in South Asia. But the perception is that India has all the time been reflecting its big brotherly approach, and that perhaps is impeding the larger convergences between India and the rest of countries in the South Asia. So I think this factor has to be understood largely. What are those challenges which really comes in a manner where timely handling those challenges would really engage India in a constructive manner with its neighborhood. If India has to become a rising power, I think the first and foremost task before India is to build a conducive and prosperous neighborhood. If India is failing in building a conducive and prosperous neighborhood, I don't think India's dream of becoming a rising power would be achieved in due course. And India's achievement of that particular ambition is not only to restrict itself in South Asia, but obviously to reflect its ambition to assume the responsibility to lead the world affairs. I think the things basically which are unfolding in India's case, especially the way India's image is getting elevated, I think responses from the rest of the world obviously are changing. But to an extent, the larger issue which really comes as one of these major impediments for India to reflect its larger ambition across the globe is its neighborhood. And that perhaps has to be understood, especially in a comprehensive manner, that what are those stumbling blocks for India and why India has not been able to manage its neighbors in a constructive manner. And these factors again become pertinent on India's part, especially in terms of making responses, adequate responses to understand the larger sentiments of its neighborhood. I think that factor again has to come in a big way. If one can really take the recent case study of both a standoff with China as well as the new map, which really Nepalese Parliament has passed it for yesterday, I think we have to be understanding what is it that really India needs to be doing. Why these type of challenges are emanating at a time when India has been fighting with COVID-19. I think there are a lot of things one can really bring, but as far as the realistic assessment is concerned, I think there is no denying the fact that India's understanding of its neighborhood still remains, in fact, very limited, especially in terms of knowing about their aspiration. Nepalese aspirations, in fact, let me tell that they would like to, in fact, obviously see India-Nepal relationship growing. But the growing sentiments in Nepal, which seems to be anti-India right now, I think that becomes a very important factor in terms of understanding from India's part and addressing to those challenges in a manner which could obviously help India-Nepal relations to grow. It is nothing new. I think both Lipu Lake and Kalapani were being shown on India's and Nepal's map. In fact, since I think 3-4 decades. And since 1962, India had put security posts, in fact, in Lipu Lake and in Kalapani, and that is well known. The question is that the whole idea of discussing through diplomacy, the diplomatic negotiations, that got completely delayed. And the factor which has now come now, and the way the things really have to be maintained, whether Nepal would be agreeing to, in fact, get back to a status quo. And unless Nepal gets back to a status quo, whether India's diplomatic maneuvering will ever start. Even to resume or to have a foreign secretary level dialogue, which was committed by India, could not really see any beginning. And that perhaps made Nepal more frustrating. I think a lot of these issues which keeps coming, despite the fact Nepal knows it very well, that Nepal's volume of trade with India is roughly 95%. And the more recent, almost 5 years ago, 2015 blockade, that also created a lot of detrimental impact on India-Nepal relations. So in fact, India has to really understand the psyche of its neighbors in a manner which could help these countries understanding becoming better. I think a lot of these challenges which keeps coming is only because of lack of understanding in terms of each other's perception at the bilateral level. So I think if the foreign secretary level talks would have started in terms of understanding each other's perception on this border, the things would have been far better. And the whole idea of the division of or understanding of this border between India and Nepal again dates back to decades. I think one has to go back and understand the historical evolution of this whole idea of whether this is right or this is wrong. And if Nepal takes the case study of Sugauli Treaty, which again is it was signed way back in 1816, and again the whole process which really got unfolded in Nepal's overall understanding of their territory again has seen a lot of changes and transformations. So what I would like to say here, that these type of misperceptions which again are created especially in India's neighborhood, that really becomes an impediment to promote India's interest in building conducive and prosperous periphery. If India has to build a prosperous periphery, I think things have to be understood at the diplomatic level, has to be understood at a level by which each other's concerns can be addressed. I think there can't be a solution by having one-sided understanding of this thing. I think the time has come now for India to really engage with these many countries in a timely manner which would not really delay the process of the resumption of dialogue. So that is one factor. The standoff with China, again, is a factor which has impacted India's national security in a very negative manner. And obviously, the trust deficit, even if a lot of efforts were made to bring India-China together in the form of various dialogues and various mechanisms, various treaties exist. And at the same time, a lot of these challenges which keeps coming from China, do we understand China's psychological intentions in a comprehensive manner? What is China's up to? And again, if you see the overall process by which the whole crisis has started, again, one has to get back and understand that how, in fact, India did not learn anything from Doklam. And the learning experience of India from Doklam only got culminated into one informal summit, which has started in Wuhan, and again was followed by China's president coming to India in Mamlapuram last year. And again, the process which went into understanding each other's perception, again, is so slow and gradual. The inauguration of this new 80-kilometer road in the Himalayas, connecting to border with China, again, is a factor which has to be understood from India's point of view. And India obviously has been showing all these, is nothing new. India has been showing all these things in India's map. And in between this 80-kilometer, Nepal is concerned about their claims in that road, again becomes an impediment to understand that how best they can converge. The lack of convergences on these many pertinent issues have brought India and China at a very, different level in the current context, when the whole process was moving towards understanding each other's perception in a manner by which the movement was to understand line of visual control. Understanding was that how best both the countries can come up with a good understanding and they could define line of visual control. All these really have been delayed. And this delayed process has led to this many standoffs. And time and again, this type of standoff will create a lot of challenges for India and obviously its neighborhood. So what I would like to highlight here is that the recent standoff with China, again, has to be understood in a very comprehensive manner, and the political dimension of it, the diplomatic dimension of it, and obviously the economic dimension of it. All these three combined, if one does the assessment, I think that it's a high time that China and India should understand each other's requirement. If the center of gravity has to be shifting from the west to the east, and 21st century has to become an Asian century, I think India and China have to work together. And how they will work together, that really has started afresh. A new debate has started after this standoff. And this standoff, again, as long as this standoff continues, and if it is not normalized, the things may go from bad to worse. Conflict is not the solution. The cost of conflict will be so high that neither China nor India can afford. So it's not that conflict is the solution. The solution is only through peaceful mechanism, by having dialogues, by resuming the diplomatic negotiations. And all these factors again are coming as a part of India's foreign policy choices. India has been attempting to really come up with certain understanding on this. China also has to be living its adamant posturing, and all these aspects again would be seen as a part of larger discourse in due course. And again, that would help India, China work together. I don't think that if India, China do not work together, in fact, the West and the US, the West and the United States, they want to have conflict with India and China. But what I have been arguing is that India and China both are opportunities to each other. And if they don't really use this opportunity to harness each other's potential, I think the center of gravity, which has to get shifted from the west to the east, will never shift. Already it is in transition, and all the debates which started in the last decade of the last century, that 21st century will belong to Asia and it will be Asian century, will remain a distant reality. And that perhaps is a factor which one has to understand and really give certain, importance to this. China's understanding on this has to be again gaining momentum. I don't think China really has understanding of this India's requirement, because as I said in the beginning, China wants to have wants to be unipolar in a multi-polar world. So I think unipolar in Asia, they don't want to really digest this, that how India has been rising. So that factor becomes very, very important. Whether diplomacy has helped in addressing to India challenges at the national security level. I think every part of the problem which emanates at the national security front, India obviously had taken a lot of initiatives in resuming dialogues, even with Pakistan, despite knowing it well that Pakistan will always work with a single-minded aim to destabilize India. India has taken a lot of initiatives in the past. But the reciprocity which India basically got from these countries were nowhere near to India's ambitions to make South Asia a peaceful region. And that challenge basically has been immense now at every level of those issues, which becomes detrimental to India's aspirations to be seen as a responsible player in South Asia. So I think it's high time that this India's neighborhood first policy, which India has proposed, and India has been working very seriously. And in this neighborhood first policy, India has obviously gone much beyond South Asia. It has really included Myanmar and Thailand. And if you see the BIMSTEC, which again has been, in fact, India has been attaching importance to that, is largely to enhance connectivity. And you see India's interest with Nepal. Let me tell you that Nepal in no way would have become a member of BIMSTEC. And Nepal is very much there. Nepal is, as you know, landlocked country, nothing to do with Bay of Bengal. But Nepal is a part of BIMSTEC because India attaches a strategic importance to it. And that strategic importance has to be a strengthening by bringing the element of trust. And that perhaps, I think, has to happen only when India understands the larger predicament of Nepal. I had been to Nepal almost before this People's Movement started on a study tour. And my topic was domestic politics of Nepal and its implications for India-Nepal relation. I was there for 1 month. And I understood few things from Nepalese, in fact, our friends from Nepal, especially the academics. And they said that unless and until India understands, India changes the Indo-Nepalese Friendship Treaty and make it more relevant and not really continuing with the British India-Nepal Friendship Treaty, that would really change the overall discourse and understanding of Nepal. And unfortunately, that treaty, which again came in 1950, was a continuation of British India policy. And that has to be again understood largely in terms of changing dimension of geopolitics in South Asia. And unless until that is addressed by India and that is taken up as a part of responsibility, I don't think that India-Nepal relations again will have the larger meaning in the foreseeable future. What I mean to say here that Nepal will remain, we can't change geography. Nepal will keep sharing border from 3 sides, except the northern border with India. And that perhaps again is very important for many regions. So whatever has happened as a part of lack of understanding, having misperception in the recent past, all these have to be addressed in a very peaceful manner and by diplomatic channel. And that perhaps is very important in the current scenario. Other important areas of larger concern which India has faced or has been witnessing is in the field of global commons. Global commons again is a part of larger threat perception for India, whether it is maritime domain or outer space or cyber security. And India has really been very cautiously evolving its posturing, its policies in maritime domain as well as in the outer space. Outer space, India has a lot of stakes. India's emphasis in improving its capabilities in outer space also is increasing. India's role in maritime domain, especially in the Western Pacific, will be growing in foreseeable future. India will have a good share of its presence in Indo-Pacific region. India might become very proactive in building a rule-based security architecture in Indo-Pacific region. The convergences that India has with the United States on various international security issues that perhaps will help India to be seen on the larger global horizon. India's voices are being heard across the globe, but India has not become part of agenda setting. But at the same time, a lot of these common concerns across the globe, including energy security, climate change, environmental security, and various other factors, water security, all these I think India has to play a much important role. You see the climate change debates, how India put agenda, and those really were accepted by a number of countries during that COP21. And Paris Protocol, the US has withdrawn, India still is firmly holding the Paris Protocol and trying to address to the obligations made in the Paris Protocol. What I mean to say here that India really has been evolving, India has been unfolding, but India has to manage its neighbors in a more responsible manner. India obviously cannot afford to neglect its neighborhood. And as I said, building conducive and prosperous periphery will remain a part of India's task. And if that is not made, India's ambition to become a great power will never be realized. So a lot of these issues are being debated, and India's contributions are seen in various ways getting accepted. I think there is one common phenomenon which is against being seen coming up on the global scale is India's role in global affairs. And that perhaps has increased, but the argument which has to be given more focus, that unless India improves its position in the neighborhood, that India's role at the global level will have no relevance whatsoever. As you know, the transition from the bipolar world to the multipolar world, in this transition, India has come a long way. India has now been learning the art to deal with all the multiple poles of power in the international system. And that perhaps is India's priority right now. And obviously dealing with the bipolar world was easier because India had adopted non-alignment as a pursuit of India's foreign policy. And non-alignment was misconceived by the US as well as by the rest of the world. Non-alignment meant India wanted to work with both the power blocks. If India would have tilted with one of the power blocks, then India's overall proximity with their power blocks would have dissuaded India to work with other power blocks. So you see the whole decade of 50s, 60s and 70s, India basically featured very well across all the important things. Even you see India's voices were well heard in the mid-50s. In 55, Nepal was recognized by the United Nations. And you see the debate which had happened. Nepal was fully supported by India. When Nepal had approached the UN in 48, the Soviet Union had put a veto that no, Nepal should not be given the recognition as an independent country. So I am bringing all these. In 1950, Prime Minister Nehru's statement, if you see, he had made a statement that, look, Nepal has all the rights to move ahead at the global level, to evolve as a country, to deal with the rest of the globe at the bilateral level. And Nepal should feel free from all this. So all these aspects are very important in terms of tracing the history of India-Nepal as well as India's approach to the various aspects of global diplomacy. So what I mean to say here, that it's a very interesting time for geopolitics, it's a very interesting time for India's neighborhood, it's a very interesting time for India itself. India has to be owning the responsibility. India has to be showing a lot of seriousness in terms of dealing with this type of challenges. And if that happens, I think India's aspirations would be realizing, and that would really be for global interest. Let me tell you, India does not believe in zero-sum game. India always believes in win-win situation. It's not that India would like to really get benefited at the cost of the other. There is no example by which one can say that India got benefited at the cost of the other. But with regard to a number of other countries we can name them, that how they have benefited from some country, and obviously that cost was quite high. So I think India-US relationship, India-Russia relationship, India-Australia, India-Japan, all the major powers, these are all very, very important for India. India can't afford to get tilted towards a particular country. So foreign policy choices are now becoming more and more realistic. India has really been transitioning from idealism to realism and now to pragmatism. And that perhaps is very important transition for India and India's foreign policy choices. India has been transitioning from politics to economics. So economic diplomacy is becoming the priority. You just make a review and assessment that what India has done with Nepal in the last 5 years in terms of helping Nepal in improving upon the various factors which really leads to connectivity. And see the emphasis India has been putting. And you see the volume of trade. You try to understand that. And you see Nepal's volume of trade with China. I think a lot of these things, when goes by the data, you will see that India certainly does not want to reflect its ambition as a hegemon in South Asia. India does not want to be seen as a big brother in South Asia. That is a misperception created, and that misperception is still continuing. Unfortunately, that misperception has to be changing. And it can change only when you really have certain mechanism to understand each other's perception. Perceptions and misperceptions. These two really lead to both stability and instability in international relations. And as far as India is concerned, I think it is high time to understand its neighbors' perception. India shall not really keep claiming about all the good work which it has done to the neighbors. India shall understand their predicament, understand their perceptions, and that perhaps would help India in realizing its aspiration. Maybe I will stop it here, and if you have any questions, you can ask me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It has indeed been a illuminating lecture, and I've been reading the number of questions that have been raised, through the chat box, and because of the number of questions that are raised to us, usually what we do is we club the questions according to themes, and then give time for response from the speaker. Professor Arvind Kumar has raised a multiple number of issue areas and created a roadmap of the critical questions that are in front of Indian foreign policy if we are to resolve some of the issues, especially in our neighborhood, and move ahead, in consonance with the interests of the neighborhood in some kind of a win-win scenario. So in the context of many of these issues that have been raised during the lecture, many questions have come up dealing with different issue areas. And one of the, I think, questions that has come up from a couple of participants, I think it's related to, if I were to bring them together in some way, it is related to some things that Professor Arvind has touched during his lecture, but I think the participants can gain more from some elaboration, which is that we all know that there are, number of debates and discussions, perhaps I think some of them, as you rightly pointed out, relating to how the West perceives issues in the region, which is regarding China's role in the neighborhood, in India's neighborhood. We cannot, I think, overlook the fact that this debate is there. China has invested in a lot of connectivity projects and other economic investments, which have been seen as some sort of a concern regarding India's own, let's say, role in the neighborhood. So, sir, the question that people are raising, our participants are raising is, while this has been presented as some kind of a challenge to India, but you have said that China is an opportunity for India. So according to your analysis, how can India and China work together in India's neighborhood and not be involved in conflictual and competitive situation? Sir.
Yeah, so as I said, that the cost of conflict is too high, and that India and China, both these countries understand. And the West and the US, they have been trying to see that how sooner India and China have a conflict, because their purpose would be achieved. In this recent standoff, one has to go much deeper into it, about the genesis of it, and in what ways India's perception and China's perceptions can converge. And that can happen only through diplomatic mechanism. So if that happens, then only the things can happen. What I'm trying to say here, that China basically has to be understanding many of these larger issues which is impacting India-China relations. And if India and China, they work together on various issues. And as you know, China remains India's largest trading partner. So one is the economy, and which I say that now the overall approach of diplomacy, India's diplomacy has shifted from politics to economics. So that again is a factor. And second thing is that a lot of these issues with regard to what single step India can take to really contain China in this standoff. I think India has to stress upon the fact that line of actual control has to be defined. There should be a consensus. Unfortunately, neither China nor India have been able to reach to any consensus on the definition of line of actual control. That should perhaps the beginning. And if that doesn't happen now, if you see the history of the debates on this, it dates back to more than 3 decades now. And all the joint working group and the various mechanism by which that SR meetings, that a special representatives meeting, all these have not led India-China anywhere. So there is a lot of expectations from India's neighborhood that how India-China can come together, because that would be in the interest of the whole of South Asia. If there is some sort of misunderstanding and that keeps continuing, that would impact the stability of South Asia. So the argument is that how quickly both India and China come together to realize this type of mistakes. And these are something which again have to be seen at the greater level, the different level altogether.
Thank you, sir. A related question, I think that has come, which can be answered in continuation of what you have just said about India-China cooperation, is regarding India's approach to the Belt and Road Initiative. As we know that India has refused attending the 2 forums that were held, the Belt and Road Forum. And apart from Bhutan, if I'm not wrong, all the South Asian countries, including Afghanistan, they have expressed some kind of support or some kind of like allegiance to the BRI. So in the context of this, also we can consider the kind of debates which have been happening regarding the BRI after the COVID-19 situation. So, sir, the question is, what do you think would be the future of India's approach to BRI? Can India continue with its current approach, or do you think upon a certain assessment and pragmatic assessment, as you said, there will be some kind of change in India's approach to BRI?
Let me tell you that on BRI, India will not really be shifting its position. And China also understands it very much, that without India's participation, BRI will not be successful. Through BRI, there is no denying the fact China has been able to increase its sphere of influence across Himalayan states, minus Bhutan. And China has really been getting adequate support from these many countries. And by the way, China's investment since the BRI was launched has increased manifold in South Asian countries, minus Bhutan, minus India. So you can imagine the type of things which are happening to really mobilize these countries in their favor. Despite knowing it well that BRI will never become effective unless and until India becomes part of it. India will not become part of it because India has a long-term plan. And that long-term plan is how quickly India integrates Pakistan-occupied Kashmir as a part of mainstream territory. And as you know that Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the way CPEC starts, goes until Gwadar. So that is what is going to be one of these major geopolitical development maybe in the near future. A lot of debates have started on POK and India's integration of POK as a part of mainstream territory. And that's perhaps, as far as India's policy is concerned, policy remains the same, other than bringing that POK as the mainstream of India's territory. That will happen. And that would be perhaps in everyone's interest in South Asia. Why I'm saying that? Pakistan occupied Kashmir has really been housing a lot of terrorist groups. And once that becomes a part of mainstream India, all these terrorist networks and terrorist cells would get completely dismantled. So the threat which really the rest of the South Asian nations in general, India in particular, has been confronting from terrorism, that threat basically will be ceasing to be existing. So what I mean to say here, that BRI again is going to be the larger slogan of China in terms of showing its assertion and propagating that BRI in building their sphere of influence. So their sphere of influence got increased. I know the investment which really has gone manifold investment has gone. In fact, more recently, Xi Jinping visited Nepal, I think in 2018, and has almost committed to provide $500 million for a particular project. So it's again, I'm just giving you one example. Likewise, you take any other country, minus Bhutan, minus India, countries basically are falling in line with China's BRI.
Thank you, sir. One of the questions that has been raised by a couple of participants, as I can see from the chat box, is again regarding something that you had referred to in your lecture, which is when you argued that India does not really have a big brother attitude, but there is a perception or a misperception of India being a big brother attitude, and somewhere we have failed in terms of changing that misperception, and that it remains a challenge for India's national security and foreign policy. So if I can reframe the question that has come, I think the question is, given this problem of perception and misperception, and the fact that for many years, whether it is through non-reciprocity, Gujarat Doctrine, or many other elements of Indian foreign policy relating to the neighborhood, if this has not changed over this long period of time, what has Modi administration or Prime Minister Modi done in terms of his neighborhood first policy, which is different and which has more chances of changing this perception or misperception? Or rather, what do you think should be done from India's side as the largest economy, as a large country with the largest landmass, in order to change this perception or misperception?
It's a very good question. So let me tell you, Dr. Moniz, that India unfortunately has been missing out a number of things in promoting its neighborhood policy in many ways. India has not been leveraging its higher education potential in promoting its diplomacy in its neighborhood. India has not been able to leverage its science and technology potential and promote its interest in neighborhood. India has launched satellite for Bhutan. India has launched SAT satellite. But why can't India move ahead and really use its resources in promoting some of these activities for countries like Nepal in big way, countries like Bangladesh in big way? So I think a lot of these factors again remain very, very important. India's neighborhood first policy and the focus on BIMSTEC countries, that still has not taken any concrete shape. BIMSTEC, by the way, is not a new institution. BIMSTEC basically was established way back in the year 1997. It is being reinvigorated by the current government in India, which basically has been focusing more on the connectivity projects and promoting India's Act East policy. So I think that factor, and they still feel that they need some like-minded countries to work with. And to build that perception, I think India has to do certain investments in these countries in terms of mobilizing their regional public opinion in India's favor. India's investment has been very slow. If you see the volume of trade between India and Nepal is roughly around, I don't know, $7 billion. So again, if you see, a lot of these things has to increase. And that too, there is a huge trade deficit. By any of these assessments, you will come to the conclusion that many of the countries which are obviously getting benefit from such trade also has a level of dissatisfaction. The way India-China relationship having the trade deficit is same with India-Bangladesh, India-Nepal. So again, I'm saying that a lot of these factors have to be changing. India has to be coming up with a systematic plan in terms of making investments, using its resources, leveraging its science and technology potential, leveraging its higher education potential. See, in Nepal, I'll give you one example. Except our institution, Manipal, which has built a medical college in Pokhara, there is nothing in Nepal which has been done, especially in promoting higher education thing. The now time has come where India can move ahead. So these are some of the areas where India has to identify. Unless you make those efforts, I don't think that these countries would again be at least changing their perception towards India. So misperceptions have a history. And changing the misperception to perception again will require a lot of India's effort. And India will have to change its foreign policy choices. So is India prepared? So that is the question.
Thank you, sir. That's a very interesting point that Professor Arvind Kumar has made in terms of leveraging India's higher education potential. I think this is an issue that needs a lot of more debate involving other South Asian countries in terms of finding out what are the areas where they would need India's help in terms of developing higher education potential. What are their expectations? Whether they need more in terms, they are looking for more in terms of professional courses, or they are looking in terms of a more broad-based higher education cooperation. This is interesting. I think that needs to be much more debated. Related to that, is another question that has come, and it's a very interesting question, I think, which is that if you look at the kind of relationship that India shares with other South Asian countries, we may keep out Pakistan because of the more volatile nature of the relationship. We saw like the virtual conference that brought the SAARC leaders together, and Pakistan did not send or was not represented by Imran Khan. And brought certain issues on Kashmir, which was not really welcome in such a kind of forum. But we saw that it was overwhelmingly supported what Prime Minister Modi started in terms of the COVID contingency fund and emergency fund and all those things. And a lot of things, according to news reports, seemed like it was moving in the right direction. And there was a lot of, like, let's say, regional support that seemed to be coming from Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, or many of these countries. Now, you see the way in which it has developed, in the sense that a month before we were talking about fighting COVID together, Nepal-India friendship, and all those kind of a thing. And 1 month later, we are again stuck in Kalapani and Lipulek issue. So what do you think is really wrong, according to you, which despite moments of cooperation, it's still unpredictable that something else might come up which might disturb the relationship in the way it has done in the India-Nepal relationship? Your comments, sir.
I think India has to stop taking the things for granted. I think that is what has happened in this new map controversy. I think the things would have been settled very, very easily between India and Nepal. Now you see that the challenges have grown. It's not that India is going to change its position. It's not that Nepal is going to change the map. As I told you, that since 1962, India had built a security post across Lipulekh area, the Tri-Junction area. And both India and Nepal were showing Kalapani and Lipulekh as part of their territory. So question is, now because of this 80-kilometer road inauguration, where Nepal feels that India has been encroaching upon certain parts of their territory, all these have to be discussed at the bilateral level. And diplomacy has to be given more importance. Unfortunately, what happened, the misperception grew more and more because of the delay in the resumption of foreign secretary level talks. When Prime Minister Modi had visited Kathmandu, he had assured that there will be a resumption of foreign secretary level talk, initiation of foreign secretary level talk, to come up with certain understanding and reach to a bilateral solution. That got delayed. So what I'm trying to say here, that there is still a greater hope in India-Nepal constructive engagement, in India-China constructive engagement, in India, or for that matter, even you, I would like to again take you back to, in fact, Mr. I.K. Gujral's prime ministership and his foreign ministership. You may have read about Gujarat Doctrine. Gujarat Doctrine was nothing but asking India to give away, helping its neighbors without getting anything in return. Non-reciprocity was the element of Gujarat Doctrine. And as a foreign minister, Mr. Gujral really approached Pakistan, did a lot of things. He resumed the dialogue, peace dialogue. And one thing which he has stressed upon, that how best India and Pakistan enhance their bilateral trade. Unfortunately, there was no cooperation whatsoever coming from Pakistan. 586 items were identified. And all these items which India had identified, Pakistan would have got a lot of benefit from it. But Pakistan didn't show any, I don't know, seriousness towards really moving ahead and taking those help from India. I'm talking about 1998 and 1997. So you can imagine in the last 23 years, at least through that commercial or economic engagement, India-Pakistan relationship would have grown in a different direction. So I think a lot of these issues where they need to understand better, they still are led by misperception. India, China have a lot of misperceptions. But both these countries have understood that economics basically should be given priority. So even if they have a lot of differences on the border issue, I think both India and China have not derailed the economic dimension of partnership. Yes, India has problem in terms of trade deficit. India has to enhance its export. And that perhaps will happen if the more rigor is put. So what I mean to say here, that misperceptions can really be changing only when India has to become more proactive in terms of finding ways and mechanisms to deal with these type of challenges in India's neighborhood. But I am not foreseeing that India, Pakistan, or for that matter, the disturbances which happens, see, on daily basis, the disturbances are happening across India-Pakistan border. So if you see and follow all these, you will find that India-Pakistan relationship, I don't think is going to improve in due course. But obviously, I see a lot of possibilities between India and China, India and Bangladesh, India and Nepal, and obviously India and Myanmar, and it is happening.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there seems to be a lot of questions on the issue of non-alignment. A lot of participants are asking the relevance of non-alignment in today's times in terms of preserving the practice of India's strategic autonomy. And also, given the fact that today there is a lot of debate on another angle of Indian foreign policy, which is being termed as multi-alignment. If I may rephrase the question a little bit, what do you think has changed, or what do you think the geopolitical circumstances that we are dealing with right now would require India to do in terms of the relevance of non-alignment, and also how do you think multi-alignment is really different from non-alignment?
I think, see, non-alignment was misperceived by the United States and by the rest of the world. Non-alignment, as I said in my lecture, as a pursuit of India's foreign policy, centered around how best India can work with both the power blocks. As you know, the world was bipolar, and India could not have afforded to be working only with the United States. So whenever India needed, India went to the US for asking for the food aid. And when India saw that, okay, India requires Soviet Union, India went and signed a friendship treaty with Soviet Union and got all the support in the arms and defense areas. So it's very clear that non-alignment as a pursuit of India's foreign policy paid huge dividends. And more importantly, non-alignment was created as a platform for opining, raising voices. And these raising voices were mostly coming from the newly emerged nations in Africa and Asia. And they found a lot of convergences, especially in terms of their approaches in dealing with this capitalist bloc or communist bloc. So I think non-alignment really has paid the dividends. In the recent times, non-alignment again is being misperceived. Non-alignment still remains very important, because now you have a transition from bipolar world to multipolar world. And obviously, India has to find ways and mechanisms to deal with all these multiple poles of power. India can't afford to work with one country. So I will not use the word multi-alignment, but obviously India has to be working independent of each other. And India has shown resilience in terms of working independent of each other in many of times, except maybe that more recent Iran case, where Iran basically was supplying 40% of crude oil to India, that got dropped because of the US pressure. But as per my assessment, that got dropped only because of the cost factor. The cost factor in the sense that the money which India is paying now for the same level of crude oil is much lesser than whatever India was paying to Iran. And I don't think that we have any problem in terms of moving ahead with Chabahar and other things. So strategically, we are also placed well in Iran. At the same time, how best we are dealing with the United States, and obviously making a lot of engagements in a very constructive manner, and by building the positive atmosphere. Similarly, the pressure on India coming from the United States not to buy S-400 from Russia. India saw that yes, India requires that S-400, and India bought that. So again, how India worked independent of each other, each of these multiple poles of power. India also worked with Israel, and see how India has been working with the other countries, which again are supposedly having anti-Israeli feeling. So I think a lot of these factors in India's foreign policy choices are coming as a part of preferred strategy on part of India to reflect its aspirations and see that how it manages the global affairs in a very matured manner.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps I think this should be one of the last question for the evening. So the question is related to the news reports that we are seeing in terms of India's candidature for the non-permanent seat of the UNSC. And India has had this responsibility before as well. And there has been a lot of debate about India's responsibility whenever it gets that non-permanent membership council. And we have to see this in the context of the fact that India is perhaps one of the countries which has been most prominently vying for a permanent seat at the UNSC Council. So that is another aspect. But in relation to the more recent debates about India's candidature for this and India's actions at the responsibility at the United Nations and inside the UNSC. How, as I can reframe the questions that are coming, how do you see India would play its role, and how can India take along, let's say, its neighboring countries, and through the UN, through its role at the UN, create cooperative behavior between itself and the neighboring countries?
I think this is something which is very, very important. On 17th June, today is 15th, day after tomorrow, the election is going to happen. And I think India will get through. India will become a non-permanent member of Security Council. And this term is for 2 years. It's not India is going to be becoming this member for the first time. India has already had this opportunity to become member of UNSC earlier, obviously as a non-permanent member. And India had done fairly well. India's voices in terms of bringing those crucial, pertinent areas for building consensus were seen happening. India's understanding of the larger global issues and how those things can be articulated in a manner by which there will be win-win situation, that was happening. So I think India's candidature in the Security Council would obviously create a positive atmosphere for India's neighborhood. And India is not going to bring any of these elements which could prove detrimental to India's national security, or for that matter, detrimental to India's neighborhood. So in that manner, if you see the trends which really one can infer from, I think India's candidature at the UNSC as a non-permanent member would be very useful for India's neighborhood. It's not that India is going to bring except that the global issue of terrorism. By the way, terrorism is not only India's issue anymore. It's a global issue. So India basically, if India will raise that issue against Pakistan, it doesn't mean that India is basically just fighting for its own cause. Because if you see the linkages which really have been built between the terrorist groups in Pakistan with the rest of the world, that is a worrisome development. So that part again is not that India is going to just bring that issue for just harming Pakistan. What my assessment would be that if India becomes a part of UNSC as a non-permanent member, that would really be very objective and obviously work towards achieving in certain areas which could create an amicable situation, amicable atmosphere in India's neighborhood.
Thank you, sir. All those who have joined this lecture and the Q&A that followed, I think will have no doubt in saying that we stand a lot more enlightened on a lot of issues relating to Indian foreign policy at large, and specifically the issues related to how India navigates its foreign policy in the neighborhood, and how it can maximize its own interests without really harming the interests of others. In a way, as Professor Arvind pointed out, creating a win-win scenario rather than engaging in zero-sum games in the neighborhood, which will not be detrimental not only for India, I think, for the rest of the countries in the neighborhood, and will not be in the interest of regional peace and stability. So thank you very much, sir. And I now welcome Dr. Pramod Jaiswal to propose a formal vote of thanks before we say a good night to one and all. Pramod.
Thank you, Professor Arvind Kumar. You touched upon a number of issues that really challenge India's national security, and we got to learn a lot today. We really like to thank you for your time and presence. We hope to have you again in future on some other topic, and we can have similar discussions. So maybe in future we'll be disturbing you again on similar platform like Zoom on new topics. We'd also like to thank moderator Dr. Monish for moderating this event. It was a wonderful event. Finally, this program would not have been possible without the wonderful audience who are watching us on Zoom, Facebook Live, and YouTube. We'd also like to thank each one of them for asking questions. Thank you, everyone. Good night.